Hi, welcome to this video on getting started with TiddlyRemember. I'm Soren Bjornstad, main creator of TiddlyRemember, as well as a bunch of other resources on TiddlyWiki and Anki, which are the two tools that TiddlyRemember integrates. I'm going to assume in this video that you have at least a basic familiarity with both TiddlyWiki and Anki. If you don't, a couple resources. There's the textbook Grok TiddlyWiki, which I also wrote, which walks you through pretty much everything you need to know to use TiddlyWiki at an advanced level. For this getting started with TiddlyRemember video, you can probably do with just knowing the first one or two chapters. But if there's more you want to learn about TiddlyWiki, you can continue. At the very end of this video, we will talk a little bit about some more advanced features of TiddlyRemember, which you might not completely follow if that's all you've done in Grok TiddlyWiki or equivalent learning experience, but you don't even have to watch that part if you don't want to. As for Anki, apps.ankiweb.net, I'm going to assume that you have created spaced repetition flashcards before and that you have Anki installed on your computer and have basic familiarity with how to use it. There is documentation available on the Anki website, which includes some introductory videos and a lot of detailed documentation. I also have a series on doing all of that stuff in Anki on my own blog, which is goes more into some of the kind of practical and learning related topics rather than the technical ones, as in how you should use the system and make it work most effectively for you, rather than how you actually accomplish things within the program. I also have in my Zettelkasten a bibliography of some other resources on Anki that I really like. If you're serious about spaced repetition study, I highly recommend reading all of these. I'll have links to all of these things in the description of this video. Assuming you have that background, let's go ahead and get started with TiddlyRemember. So the first step is going to be to install it. It's a little more complicated than most TiddlyWiki plugins because there are 3 steps here. We're going to need to install the TiddlyWiki plugin, but since we're integrating with Anki, we're also going to need to install an Anki plugin. And last of all, we're going to need to install TiddlyWiki on Node.js if you don't already have it. This step kind of acts as a bridge so that the Anki plugin can access your TiddlyWiki. So let's start with step 1. Here, that's a good place to start, installing the TiddlyWiki plugin. So as an example wiki, I'm just going to use the TiddlyWiki.com wiki. We're probably all familiar with it since you have to go there in order to get TiddlyWiki, and it'll give us some content that we can start playing with. So I'm going to start by dragging and dropping the TiddlyRemember link from the installation wiki into our new wiki. We will import that. I'm also going to show math notation later in this video just to show how that works. So we're going to want to install the Kotek plugin as well. I'll do that right now while I'm installing plugins so I don't forget. Then we're going to go ahead and save this to our computer. Saved wiki. Where did it save to? Oh, my computer's just being slow. Give it a second. Nothing ever works during a demo, right? Here we go. We'll go ahead and save that to my downloads folder, and we will open that in our browser. Let's go ahead and close out of everything here that we don't need. Step 2 is to install TiddlyWiki on Node.js. I've already done this, so I'm not going to show this step in the video, but let's just talk briefly through how you would do that. You would open up this TiddlyWiki documentation, and depending on your operating system, there are some commands you can run, or if you're using Windows, you'll need to come out to nodejs.org. And this one's showing the Linux download since I'm currently running on Linux, but it will have download for Windows. There will be a button you download, and you'll double click on that file and work through an installation wizard, just like almost any other application that you would install on Windows. Then you can just verify that you've gotten this to work correctly by installing TiddlyWiki here and checking that TiddlyWiki is installed. Once you get through step 4, that's as much as you need to do. You don't actually need to create a new wiki on Node.js. TiddlyRemember is going to take care of all of the behind-the-scenes machinations that it requires in order to interact with your wiki. So with that step done, we need to install the Anki plugin. So let's launch Anki, and I've created a profile for this called TiddlyRemember Demo. And we're going to choose Tools, Add-ons. Let me just remove the add-on since I still have it installed. And we'll do get add-ons, and it's going to give us the code to paste into the box, which we'll do. Download complete. Please restart Anki to apply changes. So let's do that. Exit Anki, TiddlyRemember demo. And when we choose Tools Add-ons, we'll see that TiddlyRemember is listed as an add-on. Our next step is going to be configuration. So the first step is going to be configuring the add-on within Anki. So let's click on that. There is documentation on what all of these mean. You can read over this yourself if you need additional information on that. For the moment, I'm just going to go ahead and do it myself and talk you through how it works. So the first thing here is default deck. This is if you don't specify a deck for new flashcards within TiddlyWiki. This is the deck that it will land in. We can pick any deck that we have in Anki. At the moment, all we have is a single deck called default. We'll go ahead and keep that. That seems like an okay default deck. This next step should be filled in if you follow the standard instructions for installing TiddlyWiki on Node.js with the right value already, but you can double check that just by clicking test. You can see that it's going to say successfully called TiddlyWiki. You're all set. If that doesn't work, you'll just want to make sure that you have Node.js installed normally, but in almost every case, that will just work correctly out of the box, unless you've gone and done something strange and custom in your installation, in which case, hopefully you have the skills to figure that out yourself if you decided to do something strange with it. Now we will want to set up our wikis. In our case, we're only going to have one wiki, which is going to be the one that we created here. So this type is a file wiki. We can also pick a URL wiki if it's stored on the web. It's the same thing as a file wiki, only it will automatically download it before it tries to sync from it. Or a folder wiki if we are hosted on Node.js. I should mention, just because we installed TiddlyWiki on Node.js on our computer, that doesn't mean that we have to host our wiki on Node.js. We can continue using whatever saver we want, storing the wiki in whatever form we want, as long as we can reach it using a file or folder on the local file system or a web URL. Node.js is only required there, as I said, in order to act as a bridge between Anki and TiddlyWiki when you sync, and we'll see how that works in just a moment. Let's go ahead and pick the path to our wiki. We're also going to want to specify a permalink. This is going to allow it to provide us with a URL at which we can quickly jump back to the location where we specified that flashcard. So if we're in Anki studying some flashcards and we want a refresher on the notes that surrounded them, we can quickly move back to them. So the way we're going to do this is simply grab whatever URL we use to access the wiki in our browser and paste that into permalink here. In this case, this is not an encrypted wiki, so we don't need a password. If you do have an encrypted wiki and you're okay with allowing the password to be stored in plain text and TiddlyRemember to automatically decrypt that when you sync, you can fill that in there. Let's change the name to TiddlyWiki Docs so we have a more friendly name for it. I'm going to click OK. Let's go ahead and try a sync. It's not going to do anything since we don't have any flashcards, but we'll at least double check that there are no errors and we've configured it correctly. So I'm going to pick Tools Sync from TiddlyWiki. It is going to export all of the tiddlers out of this wiki. Then it will check for any notes. And as it says, no notes were found in the wiki. Your collection has not been updated, but that's because we don't have any notes there, so that's what we expected. Let's go ahead and add some. So let's open up the Philosophy of Tiddlers. That's something that we can work with, and quickly, I believe, add some flashcards too. So let's start by doing a question and answer about this first sentence here. So the purpose of recording and organizing information is so it can be used again. So let's ask, what's the purpose of recording and organizing information? You may notice there are these two new buttons on the toolbar since we've installed the plugin, Remember Question Answer and Remember Close. So let's click on Remember Question Answer. This is going to insert a Remember Queue macro snippet here. And there are going to be three parameters to it, a question and answer, and coming before those, an ID. This ID is automatically generated from the current date and time every time you click one of those buttons. So if I do it again, you'll see that I have a different seconds and milliseconds portion of that ID. This ID is very important because it's going to be how TiddlyRemember is able to determine which note in Anki matches up with which macro call in TiddlyWiki. So you don't want to change this ID unless the question is actually a completely different question. If you just edit the question, you're going to want to leave that the same so that TiddlyRemember on the next sync will notice that you've updated the question in your TiddlyWiki and sync those changes across to Anki. You want to make sure there are no duplicate IDs either, otherwise it's going to get confused and end up overwriting an older question with a newer question. So The kind of TLDR version of this is anytime you're creating a question, use these buttons. It will automatically take care of the ID for you and you won't have any problems. If you're trying to generate them yourself, you're going to have to make sure that you don't accidentally end up with any collisions. Use the buttons, you'll be fine. So with that out of the way, let's actually ask our question. What's the purpose of recording and organizing information? We might choose to say according to the TiddlyWiki documentation. Since this is, however, going to automatically add on the source to the backside, I'm going to choose to leave that out. We could argue either way. Maybe it's useful to have it on the front of the card rather than just the back, but let's leave it out for purposes of demonstration. And our answer, of course, is so it can be used again. If we preview this, we'll see that it's formatted this neatly for us with a question and an answer portion, and it is showing the ID number there, so if we need to go look at it in Anki, we can easily figure out exactly which question it is. Let's try a close deletion. So this is going to be a fill-in-the-blank type of card. So we are going to choose remember close deletion. And let's go ahead and use this second sentence here. So we're essentially asking what's the value of recorded information proportional to, but we're going to phrase that in a different way. So we're just going to take the sentence and we're going to grab the ease with which it can be reused. And we're going to place that in single curly braces. This portion Anki is going to block out and ask us to fill in when we do our review. There's one subset of close deletion, which is called an inline close deletion, and this can be used if you want to keep the sentence that you're occluding portions of within another paragraph, kind of to eliminate the need to duplicate that question within a tiddler. So let's see what this TiddlyWiki aspires to provide an algebra for tiddlers, how that works. So I'm going to start by just doing another remember CZ. As you can see, we've got a third ID, and we're going to add a third parameter to this macro call called inline. And then we're going to copy and paste this first portion here into the close deletion and remove the spaces. You can see that, an algebra, and I'm going to put a slash here, a or an, so that we don't give away the fact that the occluded portion begins with a vowel. You can see now that this wraps as part of the paragraph and that the ID number pops over here to the side. Just another way of doing it. So here are 3 questions that we've got. Let's go ahead and save our wiki and sync, and we'll see what this looks like in Anki. I pressed capital Y there. That is the keyboard shortcut for sync with TiddlyWiki, just like lowercase y as sync with Anki Web. You'll see here that we have a little balloon that says added 3 notes. And if we go in and study the default deck, we'll see here are our questions. What's the purpose of recording and organizing information? Well, that's so it can be used again. You can see that it's additionally added some context down here. So it's got the name of the wiki, TiddlyWiki docs, a slash, the name of the tiddler, Philosophy of Tiddlers, and the ID number. There is a link on here. In some operating systems and versions of Anki, the link may not actually take you to the right location. On my computer is one of those that is not working correctly right now. But there is a very easy way to still get back exactly to that, which is simply to edit the card, grab your permalink, and paste it into your browser. So if we do that, we're going to see that it has taken us right back to Philosophy of Tiddlers, where that flashcard is, so that we can reread and refresh our memory on the Philosophy of Tiddlers. If we flip through the rest of these, we're going to see here's what the close deletion looks like. The value of recorded information is directly proportional to blank. Well, that's the ease with which it can be reused. And TiddlyWiki aspires to provide a or an algebra for tiddlers. You can see that there's no difference in formatting between the inline close and the block mode close. It's just how it looks in your wiki. Let's talk about some of the other things that you can put within your questions. So pretty much the only limitation on the contents of a question or answer is that it cannot contain more than 1 paragraph. Normally, questions and answers shouldn't contain more than 1 paragraph because they would be very long flashcards in that case, and flashcards should generally be as small as possible. More about this on my blog if you're interested. I have a whole section on precise cards. But we might want to add some other formatting. For instance, we might want to bold things. We might want to add images or math notation. We'll see those in a moment. All of these things can be done just by using normal wiki text markup within those macros. That is all going to convert over to HTML and pop over into Anki, which also uses HTML as its underlying format language. So let's try creating a tiddler called animal identification. I believe we have a cat called Motivin Jack in this wiki, which we can use. So let's do a remember question answer. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut for it this time, which is Alt-R. It's going to drop in that snippet with a new ID, just like it has before. And let's say, what's this? What animal is this a picture of? And then we're just going to transclude motivinjack.jpg. And there we go. There's a slight issue with this, which is that if there's enough space, they're going to appear side by side. We are not going to be able to simply add space like that because it is limited to a single paragraph. So what we can do instead, if we do need a line break, is simply insert an HTML BR tag to force a line break there. Let's pop that back up again. Animal identification, and you can see that there is now a line break between it. Let's finish our answer and indicate that this is a cat. There's an image. We'll see how that syncs across in just a second. Let me show the math notation as well, because it does take a second to sync. Let's have one called geometry formulas. And let's do another remember question answer. With the Kotek plugin in TiddlyWiki, the way we enter math notation was with a $$. And so let's say, how is the area of a circle related to its radius? And so the answer to this is going to be the area is equal to pi r squared, using standard LaTeX notation, and we can see that our formula is neatly rendered there. Let's go ahead and save our wiki in sync. It's going to export those tiddlers again. When it finishes, we should see new notes have been added. We're not seeing that new notes have been added. I'm not entirely sure why that is. They certainly should have showed up. Let's try saving this one more time just in case. There we go. Must just not have quite saved before it started. It has added notes and also updated one note because we made the text bold in here. Let's go ahead and open the browser so that we can look at those, and let's make this full screen so we've got a little more space. We can see that how's the area of a circle related to its radius. On the math notation one, it has converted to MathJax format, since that is the flavor of LaTeX that Anki uses. If we preview this, we can see that it appears much the same as it did before, and with the same meta information there. Similarly for the cat, we can see that the cat has synced across here. And if we were to go into the collection.media folder in our Anki profile folder, we would see that this picture has in fact been synced across into Anki's media database. So from here, if we were to sync to Anki Web, that image would also be accessible on Anki Web or on our mobile device without having to have access to the original wiki over the network at that time. If this image does change, it will update the next time you sync. Images which are embedded in the wiki, like this cat picture, images that use the _canonical URI field to point to a local location are supported, as are hot links to URLs directly on the web. I don't recommend using hot links to URLs directly on the web if you have a lot of images, because in order to know whether the image needs to be updated in Anki's media database, TiddlyRemember has to go out and download it. So if you have gigabytes of images, and that's going to use a lot of bandwidth, and the sync is going to get very slow. So I recommend that you have your images either embedded within your wiki or on your local computer, or possibly over a fast local network using canonical URI. However, whatever you use, as long as the image shows up within TiddlyWiki, within your browser, it pretty much should be able to get it over to Anki. The one exception would be as if you somehow had a very strange image format that was supported by the web browser but not by Anki, but I'm not actually aware of any of those at this time. This media sync also works fine with audio. If you put like an MP3 file in here and you transclude that MP3 file, it will be playable within TiddlyWiki as well as within Anki. One thing you may be wondering about is all of these have currently landed in the default deck, and they don't have any tags. This might be fine if we don't have a lot of cards. If we have a lot of cards, though, we might wish to be able to keep these organized within Anki as well as within TiddlyWiki. So the way that TiddlyRemember handles this is with a thing called mapping tiddlers. So a mapping tiddler is just a special configuration tiddler in which you list a series of filters in order to allow TiddlyRemember to automatically determine which deck and tag you want. And so these can get pretty much as complicated as you like. So let's start with decks. Let's create this config TiddlyRemember deck mapping config tiddler. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say there's going to be a field called tr topic for TiddlyRemember topic. And we're going to use this topic to determine the deck. So for the Philosophy of Tiddlers, this could be a topic of TiddlyWiki. For animal identification, this could be a topic of animals, or maybe biology. That's a little fancy for identifying what a cat is, but we'll call it biology. It sounds cool. And geometry formulas, we can have mathematics. So now in our deck mapping, we simply need to write a filter that when the name of one of these tiddlers is passed into the filter, for instance, geometry formulas, the output is the contents of that tr topic field. So a simple filter we can use to write this is going to be get tr topic. We're going to pass through the geometry formulas as the input tiddler to get. The get filter operator is going to pull the contents of the field that is its parameter, and we're going to end up with mathematics. Let's save that and save our wiki. And when we sync again, we should see that the cards are automatically moved into the decks that we specified. And there we are, biology, mathematics, and TiddlyWiki. The default deck disappeared because it no longer has any cards in it. If we open this in the browser, we should also be able to see that the correct deck appears in the deck column for each card. Tags work very similar to decks. The difference is that there can be more than one tag, and there can only be one deck per card. So let's do the tag mapping. Let's say that for tags, we'd like to pass through any tags that are on the tiddlers within TiddlyWiki, and we'd also like to specify that the source of this card in Anki was TiddlyWiki. So let's do the second one first because it's really simple. We can just say source TiddlyRemember in double brackets. So this is going to always output exactly source TiddlyRemember, whatever the input tiddler may have been. We can include as many filters as we want, separated by carriage returns for both deck mapping and tag mapping. In the case of deck mapping, the first filter that produces any output is going to win because there can only be one deck. But for tag mapping, they will all accumulate and we'll get as many tiddlers as we want. So you could also use multiple filter runs in each filter to combine the tags, but sometimes it's easier to simply write different filters. So that's what I'm going to do in this case. For our tag mapping, we're going to want to retrieve tags using the tag operator. So that is going to just retrieve all of the tags that are on the current tiddler. And then we are going to want to actually add a prefix to each tag. So let's call it wiki tag : That will just make it a little more obvious that that tag came out of our wiki and is not something that we defined specifically within Anki. If we save that, again, save our wiki and sync, the tags should appear. Here we go, updated 5 notes. And if we open up the browser, once again, we will see that tags have appeared. Let's go ahead and add them here so it's more obvious. For our 3 TiddlyWiki ones, a wiki tag of learning appeared, and that's because there is a learning tag on here. There's no wiki tag for geometry formulas or animal identification because those don't have any tags, and all of them have received the tag of source TiddlyRemember. If you have more questions on this, there is full documentation as well as some examples in this mapping tiddler. I will just note also there's full documentation on the different types of notes you can create, question and answer and close, as well as pair notes, which are very much like question and answer notes, except they work in both directions. Some more information on that ID, and some details about syncing with Anki so that you can understand exactly how the behavior of synchronization works. Check that out when you have a chance to do that. There's some features in here that we haven't talked about. If you're hoping something is possible in TiddlyRemember, but you don't know how to do it or whether it's possible, come in here and look. Chances are pretty good it is already there. If it's not, what you can do is come out to GitHub here and click on Issues. And you can do a search here to see if it's already been discussed. If it hasn't, go ahead and post a new issue, and I will look at it and see if it's something that fits into my vision of TiddlyRemember, and we'll talk about how best we can implement that. There's one more thing that I would like to talk about here. If you are not interested in anything more advanced than what we've seen here, you can leave now. I will not be offended by that at all, because this is getting a little bit more technical and advanced. But I want to demonstrate how flexible TiddlyRemember really is, because you're just making macro calls. TiddlyWiki will let you put pretty much anything in for the parameters of those macro calls. And so it means we can store flashcards in their own tiddlers if we want. We can even automatically generate flashcards from other tiddlers. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate here. In TiddlyWiki, we've got a nice long list of filter operators, which all have a similar format. And so we're actually going to automatically generate a series of flashcards that's going to ask us what the purpose of each of these filter operators is. So let's see how we can do that. I'm going to start by creating a new tiddler. I'm going to call it filter operator flashcards, logically enough. Let me tag it filters, because it is certainly about filters. And what we're going to want to do is retrieve the list of all filter operators. So let's start a list widget. And I'm not sure exactly what these have in common, so I'm going to go ahead and edit this and see how the table is generated. I'm going to see that we have an HTML table here, and it looks like this .operator rows macro is being called a lot to retrieve different kinds of filter operators, since this kind of comes in a series of categories like order operators, general operators, and so on. And it looks like the way this works is by retrieving all filter operators. This appears to show up in all of them. And then by excluding some other operators. So let's take tag filter operators to start with. And we're going to need to make that into a complete filter run rather than just a single step. And we can see indeed that a long series of operators has appeared. Now, within here, we are going to want to insert a remember queue snippet. Now, you're going to see that the same ID is being used for all of these, so we are going to need to find a way to make the ID unique for each entry. In addition, we're obviously going to need to fill in the Q&A with actually different questions and answers for each item. So we're going to have to start with converting this to the widget form of macro call, just because we're going to need to specify transclusions as some of the attributes. And these attributes are going to be called ID, question, and answer. If we didn't know that, what we could do would be come out to advanced search, go to shadows, do a search for the remember queue macro, and then it is going to be this TiddlyRemember macros remember. If we edit that, we'll be able to find the definition of remember queue, and we can see that the parameters are ID, question, answer, reference, sched, and class. We'll come back to reference in a minute. We're actually going to want that, but I will demonstrate why we want it first, because we haven't seen what it does yet. For the ID, what I'm going to do is use the last modified date. So since each of these filter operators is an individual tiddler, this should be basically the same. If we were doing this in real life, we would probably want to make sure there weren't any conflicts between the modified date. For instance, a couple tiddlers could have been modified at the same time. And if that happened, we might want to do something like concatenate the title and the modified date or something like that to ensure that we come up with a unique ID string. But for now, we're just going to assume that the modified is different on every tiddler because this is an example. For the question, what we want to have here is going to be the filter operator's name, maybe a little bit of text around it to explain what exactly we're being asked to do. If we're studying this mixed with other flashcards, just having the name of a TiddlyWiki filter operator might not quite be enough. So again, I'm going to find our filter operators that we're working with, and let's look at what is being done for each of these operator rows, right? So for each one in the filter that we used before, which was the type of filter operators, it's displaying a link to the current tiddler For instance, if we hover over this one, we can see down there in the left corner that we're linking to hash all operator, and the text is all, and the text that's showing here is bang bang caption. So that is going to be the front of our card, right? The operator that we're asking what the purpose is. And on the back here in the purpose thing, we're seeing that the field is called op purpose. That is including that summary, which is what we want to remember. So let's come up here and fill these in. Let's transclude the caption field of the current tiddler for question and the op purpose field for answer. We can now see that we've got all of these flashcards set up. Let's make the question a little bit more friendly by turning this into a filter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to transclude the caption directly within a filter, and I'm going to add some text at the constant text at the beginning. So we're going to say, what's the purpose of the open backtick for a monospace code block? And we're going to use the add suffix filter operator to concatenate these. And let's add a suffix to close that, and write TiddlyWiki filter operator, question mark. And we can now see that we've got that little text around here. TiddlyWiki is showing up as a link in each of these. TiddlyRemember does remove internal links when it syncs them over into Anki, because the internal links don't really do anything within Anki, so they're kind of annoying. But if we want to, we can go ahead and escape that camel case to make that link go away. If we didn't have camel case on in the wiki, of course, then we wouldn't need to do that. These look like good flashcards, so let's go ahead and give it a shot. We're going to accept that, save our wiki, and sync to Anki. We can see that it has successfully added 142 notes. They appear to have gone into the default deck because we didn't specify a deck. That's fine. We would probably want to add the TR topic field to this filter operator flashcards tiddler and set it to TiddlyWiki, since we do have a TiddlyWiki deck. And looking at our browser, we can see that all of these have appeared, complete with our formatting and the correct answer, as well as a permalink back to the filter operator flashcards. But hold on, a permalink back to the filter operator flashcards is not really what we want, is it? Because if we're wondering about what's the BF TiddlyWiki filter operator, just being brought here to this tiddler where it talks about all of the filter operators and all the information we're going to be able to find about the BF filter operator is exactly what's on answer already on the flashcard. So that's not really very helpful. This is where the reference parameter to remember Q is going to come in handy. So currently we're using what's called soft references. The reference that appears within Anki is just the tiddler that the flashcard is contained within. But we can also use a hard reference in which we specify explicitly which it is going to be. So in this case, we're going to transclude bang bang title, or equivalently the current tiddler variable would work there. We can see now that a link to the specific tiddler that contains the information is now appearing as part of the reference. We can click on that directly within TiddlyWiki, and it will take us to the information on that operator. And of course, when we save the wiki and sync yet again, the correct reference will also appear in that permalink field. So if we edit that, we can now see that there is a portion after the hash. And if we copy that and zoom it over into our browser, we'll be taken directly to the documentation on the days operator. So there are all kinds of things you can do by writing your own macros and list widgets and that kind of stuff around the TiddlyWiki topics. In Grok TiddlyWiki, I actually use this to implement a spaced repetition system that's directly within the wiki, as well as allowing syncing to Anki. So this is just a simple example of this. It's pretty much infinitely extensible with your own layer, if that is something you're interested in. Thanks for watching.